The story of John Deere initially focuses upon a man who developed the world's first commercially successful self-scouring steel plow. His story closely parallels the settlement and development of Midwestern United States, an area that the homesteaders of the 19th century considered the golden land of opportunity. The full story of the John Deere Company over the last 170 years is one of people, places, and products that reflect our core values of integrity, quality, commitment, and especially innovation. Born on February 7, 1804, in Rutland, Vermont, John Deere started his inventive life. In 1821, at the age of 17, John Deere became an apprentice blacksmith to Captain Benjamin Lawrence in Middlebury, Vermont. John abided by his 3-year contract to work daily at the forge, while living at the Lawrence home, which was the custom of the day. John earned $30 his first year, with a raise of $5 in each of the following years. Throughout his apprenticeship, John embraced the saying, "Strike while the iron is hot." Although this is a smithy technique, this also became his personal business motto. Captain Lawrence explained how to carefully arrange the coals in the forge fireplace. Without a hot fire, the smith's job was impossible. Captain Lawrence also showed John how to control the fire to prevent loss of property. Although business was good, John could not help but notice that customers were leaving Vermont and heading west, hoping to find new lands and a better life. Stories of wide open plains with rich soil filled the conversations of New Englanders. In 1827, John Deere married Demarius Lamb. For the next few years, the Deere family expanded, and John was determined to open his own shop, but lacked the funds to put his plan into motion. In 1829, J. Wright offered to loan John money to start his business in Leicester, while remaining a silent partner. Deere promised he would pay Mr. Wright back as the business grew profitable. As with most blacksmith shops, the fear of fire was constantly present. John Deere faced this fear one night when a neighbor pounded on his door shouting fire. The blacksmith's shop was swallowed up in flames. This was not to be the last fire. John had to rebuild his blacksmith shop 2 times. Although in debt, he continued to borrow more money from Mr. Wright to replace his shops. By October 1836, John's silent partner, J. Wright, was no longer silent. He wanted his $78.76 owed to him, and decided to sue Deere to recover the unpaid loan. John Deere was forced to pay or go to jail. This stressful time became even more stressful when many of the local farmers began leaving the East Coast for Midwestern opportunities. Amos Bosworth stopped by John's shop and mentioned that he was heading west to Grand Detour, Illinois, a settlement started by another man from Vermont named Leonard Andrus. Andrus had established a settlement in a bend of the Rock River where he built a sawmill. Bosworth further explained that Grand Detour was lacking the needed blacksmith shop. Bosworth encouraged Deere to consider the move to Illinois. John's family was faced with a serious decision. The West looked tempting, but Demarius was expecting their 5th child and unable to travel. With Demarius' blessings, John left Vermont, his debt as well as his family, and headed to Illinois. Historians believe that the Deere family was left behind as proof that John would retrieve them and eventually pay off his debt, but Mr. Wright was not convinced. News of the blacksmith's arrival in Grand Detour, Illinois spread quickly through the 35 cabins near the Rock River. Farmers swarmed to Deere's shop. John hardly found time to construct a home so that his family could join him. As spring approached, John Deere was faced with a dilemma. The plows that he was accustomed to producing could not cut through the thick prairie soil. Always ready for a challenge, John Deere experimented with the cast iron plows, but could not bring them to a slick, polished surface. With such thoughts on his mind, John went to see Leonard Andrus at his sawmill. After completing his test, John was turning to leave when a flash of light caught his eye. A large circular saw blade made of Sheffield steel lay in the corner of the sawmill. Steel was difficult to acquire in America, since it had to be shipped from England. It was relatively expensive. Andrus was a little bewildered by John's interest in the saw blade, but offered Deere the steel blade. When John arrived back at his shop, he went to work designing a new plow. He began by cutting the teeth off the saw blade with a hand chisel. Next, he created a slanted rectangle out of the remaining portion of the blade. After exposing the steel to the fire, he pounded it into a curve. The idea was to cut the soil without gathering dirt on the blade. John attached the new steel plow blade to handles that he had whittled from tree roots. Then he supported the blade with another piece of wood and added a wooden beam that could be hooked up to the horses or oxen. Deere polished the edges of the blade until they shined. He was confident that the dirt would roll right off the slick plow blade. Finally, Deere tested his product. He took it to Louis Crandall's field and tested it in the thick, moist soil. Instead of using the usual team of horses, John plowed a long, straight row with just one horse. It actually worked! John perfected the design and set the new model outside his shop door. Shortly after, a farmer arrived at the shop and noticed the new plow. Unconvinced that it would work, Deere recommended that he take it home and try it. They agreed that if the farmer liked it, he would return to pay for it. If not, the plow would be returned to Deere. 2 weeks later, the farmer returned without the plow. This was definitely a positive sign. After paying Deere for the plow, the farmer suggested that John get busy making more self-scouring plows. Summer finally arrived in 1838, and so did John Deere's family. Business was growing because news had spread about Deere's plow that was known as a singing plow because of the high-pitched whine that it made as it moved swiftly through the soil. By 1842, Deere was selling 100 plows per year, so assistants were hired to meet the demand for the singing plows. Deere realized that he also had to redesign his plow to incorporate interchangeable parts and improve his innovation. Not only did John discuss his product, he listened closely to the farmers and used their ideas to improve his product. By 1843, John Deere signed and copyrighted his ideas. Leonard Andrews became his partner, and the two men built a 2-story plow factory and hired 10 employees. The result was 400 plows that sold for $10 each. As the demand for plows increased, so did the need for steel to produce the plows. Deere, although an outstanding inventor, was not the most experienced businessman. Steel was expensive, costing $300 a ton, and difficult to deliver to the frontier. John was determined to increase the number of plows that he could make at his factory. He made plows without orders and sold them upon completion, which was an unusual business practice for the time. In fact, Deere and Andrews often took the self-polishing plow out into the countryside to sell to the farmers in the region. Also during 1843, an old problem surfaced. J. Wright, John's former partner in Vermont, caught up with him. Wright took John to court to recover the $78.76 that Deere defaulted on his loan. With interest and penalties added, Wright was asking for $1,000. Fortunately for Deere, he was able to put the 12-year-old debt to rest. By the mid-1840s, the Deere partnership had expanded, and it was becoming more evident that Grand Detour was not the best place to continue manufacturing plows. It was too far from supplies, deep rivers, and proposed rail routes. At the time, Francis Albert Deere, John's oldest son, had recently graduated from Rock Island Seminary. John had never handled the financial part of his business and had left the financial decisions up to his partners. The trust level was starting to decline, so John was happy that Francis would be handling this part of the business for him. During the next 2 years, Albert had access to all the company's books. On January 13, 1848, tragedy struck. After an unexpected illness, Albert suddenly died. Although neighbors related the death to flu-like symptoms, John Deere reportedly questioned whether Albert had been poisoned after he discovered a problem in Andrews' bookkeeping. Albert's death settled the matter of moving the Deere family and business. John left his old factory, his partnership with Andrews, and his home in Grand Detour for a new life in Moline. By spring, John relocated and formed a new partnership along the Mississippi River. Funds were scarce, so to improve sales, John began advertising in newspapers and at county fairs. Deere's plows began to be sold in stores and by peddlers in neighboring Wisconsin and Iowa. By the mid-1850s, the Deere Tate & Gould Plow Company was producing over 4,000 plows annually, with new products on the horizon. By 1868, old partnerships were dissolved, and John Deere's business officially was incorporated under the Deere & Company name, with John Deere acting as president. Since then, Deere & Company has grown to be the leading manufacturer of farm machinery in the world. When John Deere invented his famous steel plow in his blacksmith shop at Grand Detour, he also forged the beginnings of Deere & Company, which has grown to become the world's leading provider of advanced products and services for agriculture, forestry, construction, lawn care, landscaping, and irrigation. With a 2009 gross income of $23 billion and a net income of $837 million, it seems to support the company's logo. Nothing runs like a Deere. Throughout its history, John Deere's company has based its heritage on integrity, quality, commitment, and innovation. From its first innovation, self-scouring cast steel plow, until today, John Deere and his company are credited with employing more than 52,000 people, operating manufacturing facilities in 17 countries, and meeting the daunting task of providing tools that feed the world.